My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to 106.7, Wilmington's Big Talker. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Sunday at 5 p.m., as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, Castle Doctrine and Stand Your Ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. In this episode of Guns, Politics, and Freedom, we will reveal a stealth gun control plan we recently defeated in the North Carolina General Assembly. Well, I say defeated, but it's not exactly dead. It has been removed from the calendar, but what happens from here, we will see. This is one pushed by the North Carolina Sheriff's Association and, believe it or not, supported by Senate Republicans up to and including Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger. Of course, the sponsor, Senator Danny Britt of Columbus and Robeson counties, assures us that this was all just a big mistake. More on that shortly. We will also discuss the narrow defeat of the undead, an Orwellian plan to track your movements by installing license plate readers right here on North Carolina highways. But first, in gun rights news, let's update you on the latest Democrat presidential candidate anti-gun rants. First, we have Eric Swalwell, Mr. Ban and Buyback. And let's see here. From AmmoLand.com, Representative Swalwell reiterated his threat of mass gun confiscation this week. He aired this threat on ABC's The View, couching it as a mandatory, quote, buyback that would strip the more than 16 million modern sporting rifles from legal ownership should he be elected president. He said, and I quote, ban and buy back every single assault weapon in America. I'm the only candidate calling for that, Swalwell told the approving panel. He cited shootings, none of which were committed with the rifle he's set his sights on, of course. This is not a slip. Representative Swalwell is openly embracing disarming American citizens and denying them their constitutional rights. It's not the first time he made blatantly unconstitutional threats to deny Americans their right to keep and bear arms. He first floated the idea in April, but added the threat of jail for those who would oppose the measure and not, quote, voluntarily, I love that, voluntarily, submit to his mass confiscation plan. He offered a caveat in what could only be surmised as his idea of a concession. He said gun owners could keep modern sporting rifles if they were locked and stored and locked at a hunting club or shooting range. Sounds like Britain, doesn't it? Other Democratic candidates for the White House have embraced federal gun licensing schemes, compulsory registration, and bans on future purchases of modern sporting rifles. U.S. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat New Jersey, for example, supports a federal gun ownership licensing plan. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, socialist of Vermont, said the United States should follow New Zealand's lead and embark on gun confiscation. More on this in just a moment, but from the Washington Times, this just in from the leader in the Democrat race for the presidency. Quote, if I get elected President of the United States of America with your help, Joe Biden recently told donors in New York City, and as the Washington Examiner noted, if that happens, guns, we have the capacity now in a James Bond style to make that no one can pull a trigger unless their DNA and fingerprint is on it, It was the Washington Times, and they go on to say the Democrats' best hope for the presidency, according to polls anyways, wants to use fictional characters exalted on Hollywood's big screens to hone our nation's Second Amendment, to hone our God-given rights to protect self and family. He's talking about smart guns, of course, the same type some Democrats in Congress have already pressed via rhetoric and legislation as the be-all, end-all of firearm safety and security provisions. Why? Well, with smart gun technologies, thieves can't fire their stolen guns. Well, at least in theory, because in reality we know that smart guns don't actually exist, at least not in a reliable enough fashion to rely on for self-defense. In fact, the Fraternal Order of Police, the National Fraternal Order of Police, has come out against smart guns for that very reason. Of course, not to mention that if such technology, even if it worked, would make guns prohibitively expensive and of course, require that all those old firearms, which are sometimes unknown to the government, would no longer be legal. Coincidence, I'm sure. Now, since Bernie and Socialist Company bring up the New Zealand gun buyback as a model for us, let's see how that's going. After all, you may recall that in the massacre in Christchurch, New Zealand, the government immediately enacted a fiat demanding a buyback of all semi-automatic rifles and magazines holding more than 5 rounds capacity. You may recall that such a buyback was also Hillary Clinton's preferred mechanism for relieving you of your guns. You may also recall that in the ever so accommodating New Zealand culture, those friendly Kiwis readily gave up their guns, all in the name of the greater good, of course. Well, it seems that all is not rosy in the land of the Kiwi. Details of the confiscation scheme were released last week, and the, and I quote, Council of Licensed Firearms Owners, Council of Licensed Firearms Owners, or CALFO, they're not happy. Now, one has to wonder about the effectiveness of a group calling itself the Council of Licensed Firearms Owners. It kind of sounds like they've already capitulated, don't you think? Anyway, the Kiwis are unhappy. But understand that they aren't unhappy about getting their guns confiscated by the government. Bought back by the government. No, they're unhappy about what the government is willing to pay for the guns. Some of the offered prices, this is a quote, some of the offered prices for higher-end firearms are out of kilter. Nicole McKee, a council spokesman, was quoted by the New Zealand Herald as saying, McKee said gun owners are angry and they're frustrated because the government reneged on a promise not to, quote, rip us off. The government ripping you off. Who would think such a thing? The quote continues, they said they would pay full value. They're not. And 250,000 firearms license holders are starting to feel ripped off, she said. Let me make sure I got this straight, actually. New Zealanders capitulate happily to governmental gun confiscation. But then they are shocked, I tell you, that the government would rip them off over the value of the guns being confiscated. Now, call me crazy, but that strikes me like somebody getting their house burglarized and then getting mad, incensed, not that their house was broken into, but rather that the burglar stole too much. Let me say again what I have said so often before. Compromise, as your opposition defines it, is a process in which you might lose less than under their original proposal, but you still lose. Gun control compromise goes like this. The gun banners want the whole loaf, but generously compromise for half the loaf. Then a year later, they come back asking for all of that, but once again, they compromise for half. On and on, ad infinitum, until what you are left with isn't worth discussing. I cannot stress this strongly enough. Do not compromise on your constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. I say this again. Do not compromise on your constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. That, by the way, is exactly the principle on which Grassroots North Carolina was founded. We do not compromise on principle. In a moment, we'll come back and talk about that Republican gun control scheme. Right now, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. After our break, we will come back with still more critical information that are enabling you to defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Blown. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. Now, is Trump's nominee to head the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives pro-gun or anti-gun? Well, kind of depends on who you talk to. According to Politico, Chuck Canterbury, former president of the National Fraternal Order of Police, I can say that really, has been under consideration for several months after the group supported a White House-backed sentencing reform bill. Canterbury's support for the bill, the First Step Act, caught its opponents off guard since the FOP had opposed it in the past. Now, on one hand, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, that's the lobby group for the gun manufacturers, they love the guy. According to Ammoland.com, Larry Keane of the NSSF says, and I quote, President Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has a record of no-nonsense support for the rule of law that clearly extends to respect for the Second Amendment and the firearms industry. Says Keane, quote, under Canterbury's leadership, the Fraternal Order of Police also stood against the Obama administration's attempt to ban green-tip ammunition, or 5.56 millimeter ammunition commonly used in modern sporting rifles. The administration's reason was to protect law enforcement. The Fraternal Order of Police, though, thought the dust-up wasn't necessary. All right, fair enough, but you got to consider where they're coming from. The NSSF is, after all, a gun manufacturer lobby group. Their interest is making money, not necessarily your Second Amendment rights. Sometimes the two co-align, sometimes not. Gun Owners of America, which bills itself correctly as the only no-compromise gun rights organization in Washington, is not convinced. In alerts opposing Canterbury's nomination, GOA says, quote, you may already have seen the news, but President Trump has nominated an anti-gunner to lead the ATF. His name is Chuck Canterbury, and he is the president of the Anti-Gun Fraternal Order of Police. I'm not sure I'd call the FOP anti-gun, but anyway. Sadly, Canterbury has a long track record that should concern gun owners. He testified before Congress to support anti-gunners like Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Attorney General Eric Holder. Under his watch, the FOP backed congressional measures to expand the unconstitutional and failing NICS system, that's the National Instant Check System, which is the same system where 95% of the initial denials are false positives. And on the state level, the FOP, under his watch, has supported universal background checks and opposed constitutional carry. Please email your senators, etc. My sense is that Canterbury is probably a politician, particularly given the reversal on the sentencing reform bill, but I suppose we shall see. This week's lesson from the left is once again that if you deviate from the leftist orthodoxy, you will be punished. This week's lesson was delivered to Kyle Kashuv, the lone Parkland survivor who actually had the audacity to disagree with David Hogg and the teenage gun control movement by being pro-gun. Says Forbes magazine, quote, as a supporter of stricter background checks, but also armed teachers, the elimination of gun-free zones, and heightened school security, Kashuv stands in contrast to the majority of the gun safety activism that grew out of the shooting at his high school. In doing so, he's become something of a folk hero for other conservatives and gun rights advocates. We can't have that, though, can we? For his gun control heresy, he becomes the latest victim of what is being called the cancel culture, wherein any public figure who dares to disagree with a liberal orthodoxy is canceled in social media. In this case, somebody managed to dig up old racist messages posted by Kashev, which he posted when he was at the tender age of 16, because after all, we're all fully mature and responsible by the age of 16, aren't we? I never did anything at 16 that I regretted. Anyways, never mind that this was a private post, not one distributed publicly, meaning that you may now be punished even for your relatively private thoughts. And never mind that Kashev has apologized profusely for comments. Nope, in the left's ostensible utopia, independent thought will be punished. Of course, in the liberal tradition of selective enforcement, Harvard University, which seems to be perfectly okay with Elizabeth Warren lying for the American Bar Association and fraudulently claiming Native American heritage in order to take advantage of minority status, but no, for this gentleman they rescinded his admission to a conservative who made a mistake, of course, namely Kashev. Kashev has expressed hope in light of his apologies that Harvard will reconsider. Not bloody likely, but we will let you know if that happens. Oh yes, the lesson for you, which you should impart to your kids, is that the left will go to any means to destroy those who dare to disagree, and particularly with respect to electronic communications, you should expect anything you send to be used against you, so be very, very careful of what you say. The latest from John R. Lott of the Crime Prevention Research Center on gun-free zones. Fox News op-ed. This was a Fox News op-ed written together with Republican Thomas Massie, who represents Kentucky's 4th Congressional District. I know someone who works on his staff, by the way. He's a great guy. And this is the title of it. It says, Representative Thomas Massie, John Lott, gun-free zones need to go. They're not only ineffective, they're dangerous. And it goes like this. The tragedy at the Virginia Beach Municipal Center fits an all-too common pattern. Yet another mass shooting in a place where victims were banned from carrying guns. The most lives are claimed in places where people can't defend themselves on equal footing. It's not a coincidence the attack occurred in a public building filled with public employees prohibited from carrying guns, concealed or otherwise. The attack could have ended with much less bloodshed. Kate Nixon, a compliance manager at the municipal center, was concerned about a fellow employee and spoke with her husband the night before the attack about taking her permitted concealed carry handgun to work. However, the city bans individuals, including public employees, from possessing, quote, any weapon on city property unless authorized by a supervisor, so she decided against it. Fatal mistake. Unlike his law-abiding colleagues, the killer didn't abide by the ban. Kate Nixon was one of the 12 people killed in the attack. The pattern of attacks at gun-free zones isn't limited to workplace shootings. 98% of all mass public shootings in the U.S. since 1950 have occurred in places where the average citizen was banned from possessing guns. Banks, churches, sports stadiums, and many members of Congress are protected with firearms. Yet children inside the classroom are all too frequently left vulnerable. To combat this, Representative Thomas Massie, co-author of this op-ed, introduced H.R. 3200 last week, a bill that repeals the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990. 20 states, to varying degrees, allow teachers to carry. Some of these states have had their laws in place for decades. The Safe Students Act would make it easier for state and local governments to unambiguously set their own firearm policies by eliminating the one-size-fits-all federal ban on guns in school zones. The Crime Prevention Research Center has released a new report examining every school shooting in the United States from 2000 through 2018. There were 306 documented cases of gunshots on school property, 48 of which were suicides. Not counting suicides, 193 people killed and 267 were injured in these incidents. 4 cases were instances of accidental gunshots by police officers. The rate of school shootings and the number of people killed by them has increased significantly since 2000. The annual death rate from 2009 to 2018 was twice that of 2001 to 2008. even when one excludes suicides. This increase has occurred exclusively among schools that don't allow concealed carry for teachers and staff. Indeed, with the exception of suicides or gang violence outside of school hours, no school that allows teachers to carry has experienced a death or injury from a shooting. Utah, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, parts of Oregon all allowed permitted teachers and staff to carry without any additional training requirements. Other states left it to the discretion of local superintendents or school boards. As of December 2018, teachers carried handguns in more than 30% of Texas school districts. And in September 2018, Ohio teachers were carrying in over 200 school districts. According to Clark Potion, senior member of Utah's Concealed Firearm Review Board, roughly 5% of Utah teachers carry permitted concealed handguns at school. He estimates that support staff, janitors, librarians, secretaries, cafeteria staff carry at a higher rate, between 10 and 12%. 17 million Americans have concealed handgun permits. This is 8.5% of the adult population when one excludes permit-unfriendly California and New York. Nobody knows whether the person next to them might have a gun. Carrying in a school isn't really any different from carrying in a grocery store, a movie theater, or a restaurant. The rate of school shootings, the number of people killed by them, has increased significantly since 2000, yet no school that allows teachers to carry has experienced a death or injury from a shooting. That's very important. Essentially, he says, gun control groups paint a frightening picture of what can go wrong if teachers carry concealed firearms, but that fear loses credibility in light of the overwhelming success of concealed carry at schools. Armed teachers deter attackers. It's past time for us to pass common sense laws that work. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7. After our break, we will return with more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, today on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. You might not know it, but you dodged two bullets in the North Carolina General Assembly recently. For the first, allow me to quote from the Facebook page of gun rights and conservative stalwart Representative Larry Pittman of Cabarrus County. Now, you may recall that Representative Pittman has twice sponsored constitutional carry bills as well as a variety of other freedom-oriented legislation. The main players in stopping the Orwellian bill I am about to describe are Representative Michael Speciale of Craven County and a new up-and-comer, Representative Keith Kidwell of Beaufort and Craven counties. Kidwell is a freshman who I believe has great potential to be a defender of liberty. This is what Representative Pittman had to say on his Facebook page. HB 87, license plate reader systems in state ROWs, is a stinker. ROWs, I guess, being rights of way. This bill would put license plate readers along all our state's highways. I call this the Dracula bill. No matter how many times it's killed, it just keeps coming back. Representative Speciale killed the bill twice in committee. So it was brought up a third time when he had to be in another committee and barely passed. When it came to the floor, Representative Speciale, Representative Kidwell, and I, being Larry Pittman, of course, argued against it. It barely passed 59 to 57 and passed third reading, which was a voice vote. Then Representative Rogers, who had voted for the bill, changed his mind and moved to reconsider. That motion passed 80 to 36. Upon reconsideration, the bill failed 47 to 69. The supporters of this bill pointed out that having license plate readers along our state highways could help law enforcement catch kidnappers, car thieves, and bank robbers, that sort of thing. While that is true, Representative Speciale argued that the same thing could be accomplished by putting such devices on law enforcement vehicles so they could help track down a known suspect rather than infringing on our right of free movement and allowing the government to spy on our citizens. He, Representative Kidwell, and I also argued that, even if not currently intended, a system like this all over our roadways could also be used by an oppressive government to track the movements of every citizen, and that people who happen to disagree with such a government could specifically be targeted for that purpose. I reminded the body of George Orwell's 1984. I told him that Orwell intended that book to be a warning of how dangerous a government might become to the liberty of our citizens, but that some folks take it as a guidepost for where they think government should go. I said that such an oppressive government would delight in the ability of such a surveillance system to keep track on innocent citizens, and that current oppressive governments would love to have it in their countries. I am glad to have been a part of stopping this very dangerous bill, however well-intended it might have been. Now I am just being very alert to the possibility that the bill might reappear as an amendment to something else. That's something, by the way, you have to watch for all the time in the General Assembly. That's the kind of thing you have to watch for around here, he says. So you dodged a bullet on that one for now anyways, but more as it develops. Believe it or not, the second bill we killed last week was as bad or worse. Imagine our surprise when Republicans, yes, Republicans, snuck gun control into what was originally a pro-gun bill. At issue was Senate Bill 90, which was languishing in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Originally, it would have enabled concealed carry in churches which also happen to run schools and are, by virtue of that, under current law, educational property where carrying a firearm would be a Class I felony. So it was a good bill, basically, at that point in time, but in apparent collusion with the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, Republican Danny Britt of Columbus and Robeson counties stripped all of that out and instead inserted language to convert that to reform our handgun permit systems. Unfortunately, it also, either intentionally or, if Britt is to be believed, accidentally, would also transform North Carolina from a shall-issue state for its concealed handgun permits into a may-issue state, kind of like New York, for example. The good news is that at least for now you have won a great victory. The proposed committee substitute, or PCS if you will, for SB 90 has been pulled from the Judiciary Committee calendar and will likely not be considered anytime soon, if at all. It has come to our attention that Senator Danny Britt has been responding to many respondents to GRNC's alert against the bill by telling them that we are incorrect about the bill. At least initially, Senator Britt apparently didn't understand his own bill, perhaps because it was the North Carolina Sheriff's Association that fed him a bill of goods. Now that he apparently understands the problem, he has professed the best of intentions, and I guess we'll just have to take him at his word. But in its current form, SB 90, the PCS, would indeed make concealed handgun permits discretionary by adding essentially the same subjective good moral character clause which sheriffs have been using to arbitrarily deny pistol purchase permits for many decades. It would do so under a new GS 14-415 A1-2 by requiring applicants for concealed handgun permits, which it would now call a Class A permit, it would require them to also qualify for a pistol purchase permit, which they now would call a Class B permit. So in other words, there is no discretionary language in getting a concealed handgun permit, but if you also have to qualify to get a pistol purchase permit, which does require the good moral character clause, then it would be required. It would essentially make the concealed handgun permit system discretionary. The language is at best vague. Now, we can argue forever whether its vagueness limits or actually expands the sheriff's arbitrary discretion or ability to deny permits, but the bottom line is this. 1919 Jim Crow language originally intended to deny guns to blacks has no place in modern statutes, and especially not in our hugely successful shall-issue concealed handgun statute, which GRNC got passed back in 1995, and which has produced a huge plummet in North Carolina violent crime ever since. Now, I appreciate that Senator Britt offered to fix the language to remove the good moral character clause in the concealed handgun permit language. While a nice gesture, doing so fails to address the problem that the SB 90 PCS is flawed not only in execution but in concept. The portion of the PCS dealing with pistol purchase permits, or what they now call Class B permits, purports to be an improvement because it authorizes, yes, authorizes applicants to purchase as many handguns as they want over 5 years for a higher $25 fee. You may know that to get a purchase permit right now, you go to your sheriff, you pay him $5, he does a computerized background check, and your permit is good for 5 years. $5 per handgun purchased. This would be a single $25 fee and would be good for 5 years. Now, ignoring for a moment that authorizing handgun purchases turns a right into a privilege, and that for people of lesser means who can only afford one defensive handgun, they would now experience a 500% tax increase from $5 to $25 to buy a single handgun, I want you to consider the following. 6 years ago, thanks to the efforts of GRNC and then Senator Buck Newton as part of a restaurant carry bill, HB 937, the North Carolina Senate voted to repeal our Jim Crow purchase permit law in favor of point-of-sale checks as done in nearly all other states. Unfortunately, when the bill was sent to the House, then Speaker Thom Tillis insisted the measure be removed. By contrast, what the North Carolina Senate is doing now is to cement our Jim Crow purchase law permanently into place by enshrining it in such a way as to make full repeal all but impossible. It is often said that the perfect is the enemy of the good. In this case, the mediocre is the enemy of the morally just. At issue is the role of the North Carolina Sheriff's Association in the debacle. By all indications, they wanted the good moral character clause applied to concealed handgun permits in order to increase the power of sheriffs, and were perhaps disingenuous with their negotiations with Senate bill sponsors. Moreover, the PCS would have given sheriffs power over to whom they issued either pistol purchase permits or concealed handgun permits, if they issued such permits at all. As I've repeatedly said over my 25 years of directing gun rights organizations, these sorts of debacles can be avoided if legislators would just talk to us first. In the opening days of the legislative session, our team distributes a letter to each legislator advising them to treat GRNC not just as an advocacy organization, but as a resource. Senator Britt says he was under the impression that someone had consulted us. Well, impressions can be misleading because they didn't, and this is the result. When you come back, we will talk about a letter from Senator Britt and our response, which I think is instructive to all in the gun rights movement. Meanwhile, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. After a short break, we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. As promised in our last segment, here is what Senator Danny Britt had to say about our alert, pointing out that his bill would have effectively gutted our concealed handgun law. It is instructive because he says some of the things you will often hear from politicians as they attempt to silence your objections. So, here it is. Dear constituent, please be advised that information being distributed by Grassroots North Carolina omits critical details. The attached documents will shed a light on the truth, so please read these carefully. I hope this helps you understand. First, it's disappointing the representatives from Grassroots North Carolina are unable to reach out to their legislators with a phone call or an in-person meeting to discuss such issues of critical importance. A simple phone call to discuss and request to have the bill pulled from committee would have remedied the situation. Second, the truth is we tried to make the pistol purchase permit system less relevant in an effort to eventually get rid of it entirely. I will tell you in a moment why that is not true. What the bill does is allow someone to obtain a single pistol purchase permit and with that permit to purchase as many handguns as they want over the course of a 5-year period. The intention of the bill is also designed to make the appeals process easier and more exhaustive. Language in the PCS clearly states shall issue, and nowhere does it state may issue, as has been reported by GRNC. As you will see shortly, we did not say that it did that. And we said that it did it, not that it said it, but I'll talk about that. The purchase permit provisions were the only provisions intended to be changed. There was never any intention to modify the concealed handgun permit process. The only modification was due to an error made in drafting when attempting to merge the language of both bills. This modification was a last-minute change and did not allow adequate time for myself or Senator Daniel to fully review the language. The version of the bill appears as it appears in committee is seldom, if ever, identical to the final version of the bill, and often, due to human error, mistakes are made. Bills are not drafted by legislators, staffed, yada, yada, yada. All of this and the supporting documents were sent to grassroots, but the information is not being released. Also not true, but anyways. Further, when this bill was placed in committee, it was for discussion only because of the PCS. Therefore, that would allow discussion, modifications, and possible shelving completely if the support was not there for the final product. It is far from a vote. It is important to know that no one from GRNC contacted our office or appeared in committee in favor of or against this proposed legislation. That's because we didn't know the PCS was going to gut the bill until the committee meeting. At the request of Grassroots Representative Paul Vallone, I will not make an effort this session to ease the pistol purchase permit requirement. If he changes his mind, I want you to listen to this part. If he changes his mind and would like a seat at the table to meet in a professional manner along with representatives from the National Rifle Association, we would be happy to do so going forward. Well, as I'm sure you'll agree, that's quite a letter. And here is our response, which we delivered not to Britt, who appears to have his mind made up, but instead to his boss, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, the Republican in charge of the North Carolina Senate. And I said this: having read your Facebook message in support of the proposed committee substitute for Senate Bill 90, originally titled Protect Religious Meeting Places, it is regrettable the bill fell short of expectations. That said, however, I suspect you will agree that it is unproductive to have members of the North Carolina Senate Republican caucus denouncing the state's primary gun rights organization, especially considering the help our Political Action Committee has given conservative political candidates in the North Carolina General Assembly. In a letter Senator Danny Britt recently sent to those who contacted his office regarding the S90 PCS, he dismissed our concerns, saying, quote, language in the PCS clearly states shall issue, and nowhere did it state may issue, as has been reported by GRNC. In truth, what the PCS says is far less important than what it does. Under the proposed GS 14415.12 A12, an applicant for the new Class A or concealed handgun permit would also have to qualify for a Class B or pistol purchase permit. And under the proposed 14415.12 A4, an applicant for the Class B permit would have to satisfy a sheriff of their, and I quote, good moral character, an arbitrary clause dating from 1919, which was originally used to deny guns to minorities during the Jim Crow era and has been used since for generations to wrongfully obstruct handgun purchases. I'm sure you are familiar with the transitive property of equality. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. In this case, if a concealed handgun permit must also meet the applicants for a purchase permit, and the purchase permit allows sheriffs to arbitrarily pronounce good moral character, then concealed handgun permits are subject to sheriff's good moral character judgment, which would make concealed handgun permits may issue. As I said in a recent alert, this debacle could have been avoided if Senator Britt had simply contacted stakeholders, including GRNC, when drafting the PCS. Britt told me he was, quote, under the impression we had been contacted. But apparently impressions can be misleading. The first we heard of the S90 PCS was when it was presented as a done deal. Moreover, despite Senator Britt's assertion, no supporting documents were ever sent to our organization. One organization, however, apparently was consulted. According to Britt, the North Carolina Sheriff's Association had a hand in drafting the bill, and seems to have done a fine job of drafting language to expand money and power for its members at the expense of gun owners. Senator Britt in a letter to his GRNC supporters, quote, "At the request of grassroots Representative Paul Vallone, I will not make an effort this session to ease the pistol purchase permit requirement." In truth, what I asked Senator Britt to do, and what I'm asking you to do as well, is to ease the pistol purchase permit requirement by repealing it entirely. As I'm sure you agree, racist Jim Crow language originally intended to deny guns to blacks has no place in modern statutes. There can be little doubt that GRNC and gun owners have supported ostensible Senate conservatives. As you know, in 2018, the GRNC Political Victory Fund made independent expenditures, including mailings, automated telephone alerts, social media advertising, and radio spots for a number of Senate Republicans, including Carl Ford, Wesley Meredith, Jeff Tart, and Trudy Wade. As a senator in his second term, Britt attempted to explain the, quote, political realities to me, insisting that a vote for a full repeal of the pistol purchase permit law would expose Republicans in marginal districts to defeat. As I explained to him in my 25 years of political action, the reality I have discovered is that the longer a party holds power, the more it clings to power. The more it clings to power, the more risk-averse it becomes. And the more risk-averse it becomes, resulting in little or no action on behalf of voters who gave it a majority, the less enthusiastic its base becomes, eventually deserting the party at the polls and leading to loss of its majorities. I fear that is what we are experiencing today. Senator Britt also said of me, if he changes his mind and would like a seat at the table to meet in a professional manner, along with the representatives of the National Rifle Association, we will be glad to work with him going forward. Ignoring for a moment that the seat at the table pablum is typically directed at those whom politicians deem to be underlings, I suspect you share my concerns about the professionalism of the NRA. The group was absent from the current debate, perhaps due to its ongoing internal struggles. And you probably remember the days we sat in your office when Democrats controlled the legislature, lamenting NRA endorsements for anti-gun Democrats such as Senate President Pro Tem Mark Basnight, Speaker Jim Black, and Governors Jim Hunt and Mike Easley. In your Facebook message touting the bill, you expressed support for the Second Amendment. In years past, you were indeed a Second Amendment stalwart, Senator Berger. But rather than relying on a flawed bill like the Senate 90 PCS to demonstrate your support, I suggest you pass legislation to protect churches, which happen to be co-located with schools, to protect children from violent sociopaths by arming faculty members, or even by passing legislation for permitless concealed carry, such as House Bill 746, which passed in the last session in the House, but died for lack of a Senate hearing. As always, I stand ready to defend and regain our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. My name is Paul Vallone. You have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7 WilmingtonBigTalker.com, where each Sunday at 5 p.m. as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your right to keep and bear arms. Check out our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop at HyattGuns.com. Check out my website at GunsPoliticsAndFreedom.com. Spell out the and, GunsPoliticsAndFreedom.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next Sunday at 5.